The third chakra is the solar plexus chakra, and it's about the personality, the ego, our personal power, how we feel about ourselves in the world, our internal code of who we are, and it finishes out the trilogy of the physical chakras. The solar plexus energy is right here. It's basically in the gut, stomach area, underneath the heart, but above the sacral. This energy center becomes our dominant vibration as we are going through puberty. It's an extension of the individuation process that we started with the sacral chakra around the age of 7. This next level of individuation is what forms our self-image. It's where we develop our ego and form an identity that is separate from the identity we inherit from our family. The lower 3 chakras all relate primarily to physical forms of power. The first chakra is the root chakra, and that resonates to group or tribal power. The second chakra is the sacral chakra, and that resonates to the flow of power between the self and others. The third chakra, what we're talking about today, the solar plexus chakra, relates to our personal power in relation to the external world, and it ultimately becomes the magnetic core of our personality. When it comes to how the third chakra energetically affects the physical body, the third chakra is connected with the stomach, pancreas, and adrenals, the upper intestines, the gallbladder, the liver, and the middle spine. The illnesses that originate here are activated by issues related to self-responsibility, self-esteem, fear of rejection, and an oversensitivity to criticism. By the way, I should have said already, I'm working from the book Anatomy of the Spirit, written by Dr. Caroline Myss, and a lot of what I'm telling you today is quoted straight out of her book Anatomy of the Spirit, and I will try to be good about alerting to you when I am using her words verbatim. And she breaks each chakra down in her book with sacred truth, the primary strengths and fears, the way that it affects the physical body. And she's using this from decades of experience as a physician and a medical intuitive. And she's run a lot of workshops and she's done a lot of self-work. So she is a huge resource for this information and she's laid it out really well. So that's how I'm doing this series, is basically studying her book and then sharing it with you. So let me get back to today's topic, which is the solar plexus chakra. And she breaks down, like I was saying right now, the primary fears is what we're talking about. Primary fears are fear of rejection, criticism, looking foolish, failing to meet our responsibilities, all fears that are related to physical appearance, and the fears about other people discovering our secrets. Those are all solar plexus related fears. Now, the primary strengths related to the solar plexus, there's so much potential in here. So this is one I'm really excited about sharing because I think that these things are kind of left behind and dormant in a lot of people. And I'm including myself in that bunch, that I wish these things would have been brought out and nurtured in me. I'm like, where were my rites of passage where this helped? The primary strengths associated with the third chakra, the solar plexus: self-esteem, first and foremost, self-respect, self-discipline, ambition, the ability to generate action, and the ability to handle a crisis, the courage to take risks, generosity, ethics, and strength of character. Quite the powerhouse. The sacred truth of the third chakra is this: honor oneself. So simple, but comes with lots to do. The energies that come together in the chakra have one spiritual goal: to help us mature in our self-understanding, the relationship we have with ourselves, and how we stand on our own and take care of ourselves. It is largely the building and earning of your own self-respect. Dr. Myss says, all 3 spiritual currents merge to form the intuitive voice of our solar plexus. As we develop a sense of self, our intuitive voice becomes our natural and constant source of guidance. So this is where the voice of conscience develops. When it comes to developing self-esteem, How we feel about ourselves, whether we respect ourselves, Dr. Myss says, determines the quality of our life, our capacity to succeed in business, relationships, healing, and intuitive skills. Self-understanding and acceptance, the bond we form with ourselves, is in many ways the most crucial spiritual challenge we face. In truth, if we do not like ourselves, we will be incapable of making healthy decisions. Instead, we will direct all of our personal power for decision-making into the hands of someone else, someone we want to impress, or someone before whom we think we must weaken ourselves to gain physical security. People who have a low sense of self-esteem attract relationships and occupational situations that reflect and reinforce this weakness. The third chakra in particular resonates to the boundaries of the physical body. Do we feel that our body is physically strong, or do we feel physically weak? Do we feel capable, or do we feel handicapped? Are we too tall or too short? From a spiritual perspective, Dr. Myss says, any and all physical assets and limitations are illusory, mere life props. Yet a person's acceptance of or resistance to them is critical to entering spiritual adulthood. If someone is physically handicapped, say that they live every day in a wheelchair, no doubt the physical limitations are very real, but this person still has the power to decide whether being in a wheelchair will handicap their spirit, is how Caroline Myss puts it. So, life is a never-ending series of choices if you haven't noticed. There is unlimited potential inside each person to transform their life if they can apply determination and have a firm sense of responsibility, a willingness to respond to life and make authoritative choices. If we are on a path to try and improve our lives, we know we have to make changes and do the difficult things, like unplugging from negative influences and people. Developing a strong sense of self is very much about forming a strong sense of boundaries around that sense of self. And a boundary is typically a no, saying no to things that are not in alignment with our sense of responsibility. Through making these choices that enhance our internal power and limit the authority of the physical world over our lives, we are strengthening our energy field and along with it, our sense of self. Self-esteem and intuition are highly related. Intuition is not the ability to engage in prophecy. It is not foretelling the future in order to avoid financial loss or painful relationships. Intuition, Dr. Myss says, is actually the ability to use energy data to make decisions in the immediate moment. Energy data are the emotional, psychological, and spiritual components of a given situation. Usually this data makes its presence known by making us feel uncomfortable, depressed, and anxious, or at other times, drifty and detached as if we are cut off from our feelings. Energy or intuitive sensations signal that we have reached a crossroads in our life and we have an opportunity to influence the next stage, at least to some degree, through the choices that we make now. The intuition and independence of the third chakra give us the capacity to take risks and to follow through on our gut feeling. Most people still think that intuition is some kind of clear direction, a voice that tells us everything we need to know in order to secure complete happiness. But intuition actually means, quote, having the self-esteem to recognize that the discomfort or confusion that a person feels is actually directing him to take charge of his life and make choices that will break him out of stagnation or misery. If we suffer from having low self-esteem, we often cannot act on our intuitive impulses because the fear of failure is too intense. It takes courage and personal power to follow through on the guidance we receive. So long as we use comfort and security as our criteria of success, says Dr. Myss, we will fear our own intuitive guidance because by its very nature, it directs us into cycles of learning that are sometimes uncomfortable. So guidance requires our action, yet it guarantees no safety, it guarantees no outcome. But it's pushing through this fear of taking risks that we learn to trust ourselves. Dr. Myss says, belief in oneself is required for healing. Excuse me. Before I recognized the significance of self-esteem for developing intuitive skills, I would have stated that faith is the most important factor in healing. I now equate faith with self-esteem and personal power because low self-esteem reflects one's lack of faith in oneself, as well as in the powers of the unseen world. We can use the courageous pursuit of a goal to give life to this internal source of empowerment, to become firmly connected with our personal agency. And as this personal power develops and we shift our center of gravity from external to internal, we are in a moment of spiritual passage toward maturity. And many cultures mark this kind of thing with a rite of passage, traditions and rituals for young people that represent a coming of age of the spirit. In times past, when certain Native American tribes were raising their male children to become capable adult warriors, the boys would come to a rite of passage where they were sent away from the tribe to live for a time alone in the wilderness. This was the moment of their initiation into spiritual maturity, into becoming men. The ritual likewise incurs the recognition and acceptance by the tribe of this individual's passage into maturity. And often, once initiated, the individual is subject to more mature expectations of friends and family. Caroline Myss breaks the development of self-esteem into 4 stages: revolution, involution, narcissism, and evolution. When it comes to the first one, revolution, Caroline Myss says this: developing self-esteem requires an act of revolution or several mini-revolutions in which we begin to separate from group thought and establish our own sense of authority. And this can be like realizing that we have a different opinion than our family or our peers. But in either case, we are going to be faced with the challenge to free ourselves from that group's energy. The act of finding our voice, says Dr. Myss, even in many revolutions, is spiritually significant. Spiritual maturity is measured not by the sophistication of a person's opinions, but by their genuineness and the courage necessary to express and maintain them. So not stubbornness, not locking horns, but rather the capacity to stand your ground as a reflection of a genuine inner belief. The second stage is involution. Self-examination and knowledge promote choice and action, and many people feel unready for either. Caroline Myss remarks this in her book when she's talking about her workshops, where part of the day's lesson would be to start asking reflective questions, to start looking internally and to introspect, basically. And some participants would come up to her later and admit that during these times where they're supposed to be reflecting and asking themselves deep questions, they were kind of just zoning out and actually detaching from the activity. So this revealed to her that many people just don't feel ready to go there. But involution is necessary. It's just inquiring into ourselves, and we can do that in baby steps as we're ready to be honest with what we find when we look. Because sometimes this involution means reevaluating major aspects of our lives. This is kind of how we figure out who we are, what we really want. When we reevaluate major aspects of our life, we might be looking at the roles that we've come to be playing and that maybe we haven't taken an assessment in a while. We have roles in relationships, roles within groups, and sometimes once we do introspect on these parts of ourselves, we find that they're undeniably a negative influence on our ongoing development, that they may have been right for us at one time, but they're no longer right for us now. Stage 3 is narcissism. Now, narcissism obviously gets a bad rap, especially these days. There's a whole culture around kind of misinterpreting narcissism. So I will refer to this as healthy narcissism. So healthy narcissism is a necessary energy to work with in order to develop a strong sense of self. There's just no getting around it. The word ego even has kind of a bad rap just from being misinterpreted these days. So healthy ego is good. Healthy narcissism is good. Okay, let's move on. The choices we make to design ourselves, like how we do our hair, how we dress, how we physically present ourselves, the physical activities that we do to shape our body, just all of this effort, these choices, all these outward changes, they reflect changes that are occurring on the inside of us. And this is a vulnerable stage as we are creating ourselves as individuals. We may encounter unpleasant critical reactions from our tribal group or associates, but narcissistic energy is what gives us the backbone to recreate ourselves in the face of opposition. Without it, we can't carry on with our journey toward discovering who we really are, what we really like, and what we truly find purposeful and meaningful in life. So don't let them knock you down. The fourth and final stage toward self-esteem is evolution. And this is an internal stage in developing self-esteem. To be internally evolved is to be able to maintain your principles, your dignity, and your faith without compromising any energy from your spirit. Many people who have achieved this level of internal evolution were at one time accused of being narcissistic, oftentimes because their vision of how to improve the world was perceived as being much more intense than the group's consensus. A passionate person with evolved self-esteem can easily be misunderstood as being self-absorbed or narcissistic, at least for a time. It is through this last stage of internal evolution where personality becomes persona, an archetypal force, and it is here that one's own spirit takes command, and the world will also yield to its force. The journey to personal power is largely about becoming an adept at the internal process of self-inquiry and symbolic insight. This is the vital spiritual task that leads to having faith in yourself. Developing from the discoveries of the truth of who you are leads to a life that's naturally energized by the gift of confidently being able to be your real, authentic self. As the Gospel of Thomas has told us, to bring forth what is within you will save you. But if you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. And as Polonius says, to thine own self be true. We are biologically aligned to learn the lesson that our bodies thrive when our spirits thrive. As we gain the strength and stamina that come from living with self-esteem, our connection to our intuitive abilities strengthen and emerge naturally. The sacred truth of the solar plexus, again, is to honor oneself. And how can you honor what you have not bothered to truly investigate? So here are some reflection questions provided by Dr. Myss that will help you get that investigation started. Check in with that solar plexus, personality, ego center, and these are just great starting points to reflect on. Maybe get out your journal, write down your answers, ponder those for a moment, see where you end up. So here are the questions to ask yourself. Do you need the approval of others? And if so, why? Are you critical of others? Do you need to blame other people as a way to protect yourself? Are you able to admit when you're wrong? Do you consider yourself strong or weak? Have you ever allowed yourself to be in a relationship with someone you didn't really love, just so you didn't have to be alone or have to take care of yourself? Are you continually wishing that your life were different somehow? If so, are you taking any action to change it, or have you resigned to simply keep suffering? The solar plexus chakra is the energy center where we develop the sense of self to face these kinds of challenges, and it can become a vital resource of confidence and self-esteem, enabling us to take the right action in honor of ourselves. Thank you for watching.